is a place nearby filled with ghosts and violent echoes and broken rhymes, like the field of a great battle after the flags have withdrawn and the dead have been carried away. Shortly after the First World War, a Canadian physician wandered the fields of Flanders, where so many young men had died to end the war, to end all wars. He wrote, "We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields." This is the carnage of the new Flanders fields. Thousands upon thousands killed in automobiles this year alone. As in a war, most of the young, and we grieve the loss profoundly. But what of those survivors who were so severely injured that their responses to the world about them would forever be changed? We have learned to mend the body, but what of the brain? That vulnerable, terribly delicate mechanism which lies behind the eyes. What of the mending of the shattered mind?
Unit 737, major accident, Northwest Highway and Midway Road. Timeout 2139.
Dr. Surgery, stand. This is Dr. Surgery, go ahead. Doctor, we've got approximately a 30-year-old male. We have a skull fracture. We do have blood and fluids coming from the ears, considerable amount. No pulse, no respirations, no blood pressure. Witnesses state that he had a pulse and respirations just seconds before our arrival. We are doing CPR at this time. Go ahead and start your IV ringers. Push 2 amps of bicarbonate and an amp of Epi and continue CPR. Transport as soon as possible. What's your destination ETA? Becoming condition 3, code 3 in about 15 minutes to your location.
Actually, this is 1.5. We're 5 miles to the north at 2000. We'll be unloading hot.
There is an irony here, and it touches again the fields of Flanders. In recent wars, Korea, Vietnam, conflicts in the Middle East, we have not only become more proficient at killing, but at saving lives as well. On the one hand, war was a lesson in destruction. On the other, a lesson in preservation. Emergency life-saving skills perfected on the battlefield are now applied with remarkable success to victims of the highway wars. Many who would once have died are now being saved, and a whole new population of survivors is emerging. Coma. The word itself comes from the classical Greek concept for deep sleep. In ancient times, it was believed the moon goddess Diana watched over the affairs of one who slept so deeply. Coma, a human life hanging in precarious balance, suspended in a mysterious province science has yet to fully explore. A darkness from which many never return, and those who do arrive with no memory of their sojourn there.
Welcome to We, Diana's Children. This series will explore what we do and what science has come to understand and to know about comas and other minimally conscious states of altered awareness. We often focus on things such as executive problems or frontal lobe problems, emotional behavioral, but many people never fully awaken. And so for this series, we're going to be talking about the different conditions and the different problems and treatments, some of the new treatments to help people who remain in these states. Looking at, there are different programs for awareness, diminished awareness, and we'll be talking at hospitals that offer programs for patients in states of minimally conscious condition and what is available and outcomes, and what it means to be in a coma versus a minimally conscious state versus a persistent vegetative state, and on the nature of coma. But for now, we're just quickly going to look at some of the things that we do know from a neurobiological perspective, pathophysiology, because even coma really, it's not well defined. So let's take a look at some of the things that we do understand specifically regarding coma itself. So we use a criteria, the Posey criteria, from all the way back in 1982, actually around when the opening video was made. And those of you who know anything about our current treatments, many of them are still the same. When a person comes in comatose state, when they're transported by EMS, much of what we do remains the same. Some of our imaging technology and the things we understand have improved, but there really isn't too much more that we can do. There have been hundreds of attempts to try and mitigate some of the neurological damage, but many of those have failed. And it's because of the complexity of treating what's involved in traumatic brain injury. All right, so first of all, what does coma specifically mean? Because it does have an exact definition, or exact as we can be in medical science. So the Posey criteria, which were proposed in 1982, and we still mainly use that. Here. This is what coma means as far as a definition. So the clinical criteria for diagnosing coma, it was written by Plum and Posner. The defining features, and I want to make sure I read this correctly, are that the eyes remain continuously closed. So if there's eye opening, it's not technically a coma. Okay? It may be one of these other altered states of consciousness, but it's not a coma. The eyes remain continuously closed despite the application of noxious stimuli, so pain, or something that smells bad, or something that would be very uncomfortable. Okay? Noxious stimuli, so the eyes still are closed. And there are no sleep-wake cycles, something else. So an EEG would need to be done to verify that it's a coma, or some other form of active, functional brain scanning to show that the patient is not cycling through wake and sleep. There's no observable purposeful movement. There's no motor activity. No purposeful motor activity, basically. Let's see. No response to command. So, move your hand, move your finger, open your eyes. They will not do that. And no indication of expressive verbal capability. So they may make a noise or something like that, but there's no attempt to communicate. Coma typically, for most patients, lasts 2 to 4 weeks. They're in this state for 2 to 4 weeks, typically. In some rare cases, they will move into a permanent state of coma, but this is not typical. They'll move into one of these other states. Okay? They will either move into a persistent vegetative state. I don't like that term really, but it's what's used. Or they will move into a minimally conscious state. That has been more clearly defined, both with vegetative states are versus an MCS, and there is positive MCS minus MCS, so it's closer or further away from one of these others. Here is the typical progression. Now, each person is a little different in how they move through, but it is how, typically. There is the Glasgow outcome scale extended, which is this. This looks at disability. You don't even have to be in a coma or in one of the altered states of consciousness in order to land further down. Most people at least are unconscious and in an altered state of consciousness for a little bit of time, who land further down on the Glasgow outcome scale, but it's not necessary. And MTBI, mild TBI, can put you down pretty far, even into the severe ranges. But, it's obviously those who have longer periods of coma. So, coma itself is not diagnostic completely, but it is suggestive of prognosis. But there are some people who are in coma for a while who did fairly well as far as their outcomes. So, again, there's a lot of complexity here and individuality. So if you have a loved one who's still in a deeper comatose state, don't necessarily give up hope about it. Just understand that there's a lot of nuance here, and each person is an individual. Genetics plays a role, environment plays a role, quality treatment plays a role. It's important to pay attention, okay? Vegetative state, how is that defined? The lay public has, certain thoughts about, what it is. I want to make sure that, I set exactly, how it is currently defined. But typically following, brain injury. So it is, it's made when there is no evidence of sustained or reproducible or purposeful behavioral response to visual, auditory, tactile, or noxious stimuli, and no evidence of language comprehension or expression. There are, though, intermittent periods of wakefulness, so you'll see eye-opening. That's one of the key things, is eye-opening. So you'll see them open their eyes, close eyes, open eyes, and they will go through sleep-wake cycles on the EEG. Okay, but they're not going to respond to noxious stimuli, verbal, auditory. If they're not responding to that, but their eyes are opening when they are showing activity on EEG or some other means of scanning, that is then vegetative state, and they won't respond to any attempts towards them. Hey, move your finger, move your thumb, move your foot, say hi, open your eyes. No, they will, because of where it is on the brain. We'll get to that. Persistent is added because it indicates when they tack on the word persistent. This is important too. Someone may be in a vegetative state for a short amount of time and then move on. Or they may start in a vegetative state if it isn't quite as severe. You may think it's a coma by definition, when actually they're already in a vegetative state, and then they'll move on based on where the injury is. If it is persistent, then it is more than a month or so. That's key also. Finally, there's MCS. Again, we will be getting more under plus and minus, which is modified. here, where you do start to get actual responses and some basic movement in response to external stimuli, where they do respond. This is where you finally start to get, when you start to ask for them to move the finger, or where you'll start to get some kind of mumbles and things like that, where you may start to, hey, can you open your eyes? Eyes open, or can you wiggle your finger? That can be shown again through imaging, and when you start to when you do an EEG and stuff, or if you can show that they're starting to make the transition. Something else to touch on: locked-in syndrome. Some patients, if the damages to some of those deeper areas can be conscious or aware at some level, sometimes even a higher level, and they're not able to move their body or even like open their eyes properly, yet they're aware, they're conscious. We call this locked-in syndrome. And it takes technology to detect it. It takes functional neuroimaging to see it. So these folks are in a hard position because they're aware, they can hear what's going on around them. They just seem to be in an altered state as far as consciousness is concerned. But with diligence by family members, caretakers, as well as neurologists and critical care physicians, it can be detected, and many folks in these positions are paralyzed or they have damage to the pons, which links the deeper areas of the brain and to the spine as well as to the higher areas, and there's kind of a separation between the two. And many of these people had been shut off in the past off of life support, because we didn't know that they were aware. And you've seen tragic cases like this on the news. Then there is an unusual state which really doesn't get acknowledged, and that is extreme apathy. And that is, there is awareness, but they have no drive, no motivation to do anything at all. This is a frontal lobe problem. They may want to, but they cannot work up the willpower to do it. This is like adynamia, but taken to the extreme. You also see this in patients with dementing disorders, extreme Alzheimer's, behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia, a few other conditions, CTE in the extreme cases. And you've seen a lot of patients, if you've visited nursing homes in some cases for the most severe cases, where they will be facing the window, the wall, and just kind of like, abulia is another name for the condition, where they'll just sit blank. When you reach this extreme level of adynamic apathetic behaviors, it's difficult to say what level of awareness there is on conscious level. Is it a true, genuine kind of like altered level of consciousness? Difficult to say what level of perception there is. Here is an image as far as a brain scan is concerned, using fMRI, that you can see some of the changes neurologically. And this is an image using diffusion tensor imaging, which shows that there's been a lot of loss over time. This is a patient who has been in a persistent vegetative state, and this is what happens over time. And eventually you get massive brain atrophy. So we're left with the question, what is the right thing to do, obviously, for patients who remain in an altered state? Difficult to say. These are those ethical questions where you're like, what is most helpful for the patient versus what we're doing for the sake of the family so they can put off grieving for a loss. We don't know a lot of times to what degree. People who talk about, gee, I remember this from my coma. It's important to understand if they're genuinely in a state of coma, they will not hear or remember. It is when they are in these other states coming out of the coma that they will hear and process and understand. This is a PET scan of brain activity, what a comatose patient looks like. There is no activity, as you can see, when they're truly in a coma. Those areas of speech and language and understanding, those areas that are required to understand language, are silent. There's no understanding here. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't visit. It is important because you don't know when they're going to make that transition from coma to one of these emergent states. And that is the thing. We emerge at different rates and at different times from coma. And so it is helpful. And that kind of input does stimulate as well. So, all right. And as we move along, and those are the places, and there are questions as to what we actually remember clearly, what we don't remember, whether it is more like a dream, whether it is, perceptions. Plenty of people have said, oh, this is what I saw, what I remember. Remember, the beginnings of dreaming and stuff begins at the very, very beginning, like during the vegetative state is where REM sleep and access to your memories just starts, and where we have evidence through EEGs that there is a beginning of dream cycles. Who knows how those patients perceive those dreams, because their memories will not function completely, because there's usually damage to the hippocampus as well, which is memory structures. They will have fragments and bits and pieces, memories, and imagination. There will be many disconnects, so incomplete bits and pieces. What they actually heard, they may hear some, they may not hear others. It's a jumbled kaleidoscope of vision, memory, smell, and who knows. As they move to minimally conscious and starting to function, again, these things start to integrate as new pathways are reestablished. But again, who knows how their new brain is going to function? And we could see certain connections lost and regained, and they also have received many times a lot of different medications to help maintain their stability, and effects of excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. We don't, it's like we don't know what they're actually perceiving, thinking, remembering. And those of us who are patients, that brief time, those couple days that I was in an altered state, both in a coma versus when I was emerging through an MCS and, through vegetative state MCS, I don't remember. Some do, or claim they do, and that's the other thing. There is another state, delirium, where people are agitated, they're active, they can be aggressive. Don't know to what degree memories that return are due to delirium too, or dreams that they have. Because again, the hippocampus has to function in order for you to integrate memories and access them. Don't know. There's a lot of I don't know here. These are the structures that are involved when dealing with coma. Coma itself, when you are unresponsive, your eyes are closed to noxious stimuli, the disruption is all the way down there in the ascending reticular activating system. Try saying that 5 times fast. And it acts like a relay deep down in the brainstem. And there are connections between the red nucleus, which is up further here, and the brainstem. That is the link between your spine and all the way up. A lot of basic things are controlled here, but in order to initiate awareness, consciousness, all these things, there has to be connections, whether it's physically disrupted, a few neurons or whatever, and you need to have input from the hypothalamus as well, to control your sleep-wake cycles, to get the signaling. So if there's disruption between those, or between the ascending RAS, reticular activating system, you have unconsciousness and you have coma, because those signals do not make it and you don't have a spread through the association fibers, which are needed basically to energize your brain. So in coma, you've got a breakdown somewhere between the deep part of the brainstem, but below the hypothalamus. It could be at the pons. And until those connections heal or start to become active, which is something else too. They don't have to necessarily tear or break, but there's a disruption. It could be chemical, neurotransmitter signaling, acetylcholine depletion, or any of those kind of things, an infection, but usually it is white matter disruption. Diffuse axonal injury grade 3 or worse, where there is immediate coma. 2 can cause some damage here and cause an altered state of consciousness. But it's like, that is one of the primary causes, is that there is diffuse axonal injury down in this area. So I just wanted you to see what some of the connections are and some of the places where the damage can happen. We will be talking about other altered states, as I said before, talking about medications, treatments, things like that. But I did want to introduce you to these concepts initially, and we'll go from here and we'll talk more about these different states and specifically what causes them. The next one we will look at coma and the different types, and induced coma, which is medications that are used. And it's not a real coma. In this case, I'm talking about, it is sedation, basically anesthesia. But some patients do end up going into an organic coma due to damage. So I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please ask them below. Please like and subscribe. And please click that bell icon down there and follow us in Diana's Children. And we hope you are able to find answers to some of your questions. Have a good day. Bye.